Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk to you about our field project of marine sciences about microplastic research on Texel. Alright, let me tell you a bit more about microplastics. Plastics are widely used due to their durability, versatility, and barrier properties. Poor waste management causes plastics to enter the environment and degrade into microplastics. Microplastics are small, persistent particles that enter the food chain. Organisms cannot digest microplastics, leading to long-term health effects. Health issues include respiratory problems, neurological effects, and hormonal disturbances.
Gemal de Schans, location A, is a pumping station that ends in a man-made gully flowing into the southeastern coast of Texel, whereas the Slufter, location B, is a naturally formed gully found in the northwestern part of the island. While most of the western coast consists of dunes and beaches, many of them designated as national parks, the rest of the island is mostly used for agricultural purposes.
By comparing the two gullies, the results produced can help cut the cost of microplastic prevention and cleanups, and would also contribute towards the better management of microplastic runoff in Texel.
The gap this study aims to fill is the lack of knowledge between microplastic concentrations in man-made aquatic areas and natural aquatic areas. Microplastics in man-made areas and natural areas have different sizes, but the difference in concentrations is not known.
So the research question that we came up with was, how does microplastic concentration differ between a natural gully with only seawater, like the Slufter, and an artificial gully, like the Schans, which has output from inland fresh water through the sluice, and this all on the Dutch island of Texel. Alright, for our hypothesis, we think that the artificial gully, the Schans, contains higher concentrations of microplastics than the gully that is natural, or the Slufter, due to its man-made nature and input of fresh water from inland, carrying microplastic pollution.
To conduct this research, a site with a man-made gully, location A, called the Schans, and a site with a natural gully, location B, called the Slufter, were chosen. Here is a list of the equipment we used in the field and also in the lab. For both locations, two 500 micrometer nets were tied together using tie wraps. 500 millimeter bottles were attached to help the nets stay in position and to help them float. The nets were then set to filter the first 2 hours of the falling tide at each location, allowing us later to make a comparative analysis between man-made and natural gullies on the island. The profile and flow velocity for each location were also taken for later calculations.
Then we used bottles of demi-water and buckets to rinse out the plastics from the net. First, we pushed the plastic down with the water, then rinsed them out by turning the net inside out. Then, with the help of a researcher, we used a vacuum filtering machine with a 5mm mesh filter. We did this to reduce the volume of the sample. Then, the sample was moved to a smaller cup.
Salt was added to the samples to help particles float for easier extraction. Lastly, we pipetted various samples onto petri dishes and observed them under microscope in order to count the amount of microplastics found per location. It appears the most plastics found are fibers from fishing gear. Additionally, we also found white beads that were thought to be microplastics in the beginning, but after further research they ended up being pine cone pollen.
Here is the first part of the data analysis. Each one of the stars represent one measurement. First off, we have the blue star, which represents the flow velocity. It was found that the one in Les Schans moved 43 times slower than the flow velocity in the Slufter, which affected the amount of water being filtered by the nets and thus the number of microplastics caught. Moving on to the yellow star. Through doubling the area of one net, measured in square meters, and then multiplying by the flow velocity of each side, measured in meters per second, and by the total amount of time the nets were in the water, measured in seconds, we obtained the total amount of water filtered by the nets, measured in cubic meters. Now we have the purple star. The areas of the sampled locations were calculated by converting the profile of the gullies into a geometric shape and then calculating the area of that particular shape.
Continuing on with the data analysis, we have the green star, which represents the total amount of water measured in cubic meters that passed through both locations in 2 hours. This was calculated by multiplying the area in meters squared by the flow velocity in meters per second. Then we have the red star, which represents the estimated number of microplastics per location in the first 2 hours of ebb tide. This was obtained by multiplying the total amount of water that passed through each location in the first 2 hours of ebb tide in meters cubed by the ratio of total microplastics found divided by the cubic meters filtered in total by the nets for each location. This ratio also represents the blue star that you see in the table. Because of the faster flow velocity at the Slufter, we found that a lot more water was filtered through our nets, as you can see in graph 1.
Our most important finding is that it appears that Deschamps has in fact more microplastics per cubic meters in the first 2 hours of ebb tide, as you can see in graph 2, and thus a higher overall concentration of microplastics.
Moving on, a few points need to be discussed. Firstly, the sluice at location A, Deschamps, was closed, which meant that we could not measure any discharge from freshwater input. This heavily influenced the conclusions that could be taken from our study. For this reason, the goal of the project was changed to investigate the difference in mean microplastic concentration between a natural gully, the Slufter, and a man-made gully, the Schanz. We also looked at the influence of the Wadensee versus the North Sea. This project investigates the difference between the different type of gully, man-made and natural, and the mean microplastic concentration found in the water flowing through it. Based on the data gathered, it appeared that man-made structures have a higher concentration of microplastics per cubic meter of water coming through. This could also be an influence of factors related to the Wadensee, as well as unsustained fishing practices, but no conclusions can be taken for certain.
And then finally, we reach the list of limitations for our research project.
In conclusion, the original research question of this project compared the outflow of seawater in the Slufter to the outflow of the inland water in the Schanz. The sluice at the location A, the Schanz, was closed, and so has not recently pumped freshwater into this man-made gully, meaning that there is no discharge we can measure, and thus restricting us in answering our research question.